You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Owen.
I'm Shane.
And with us today, we have special guest star Billy. How you doing, Billy?
Good. Thanks for having me back.
And today...
Billy is, of course, our veteran blog associate with his award-winning... Is it award-winning or just merely infamous at this point?
I think I'm still just infamous.
Yeah, because you're getting, mentioned on, the Gladys Slant mailing list, so that means you're in the big leagues as our blogs go.
I guess. Next step.
We all know who that is. Who are the Gladys Shane?
It's the Questing Beast guy from YouTube.
Good stuff.
I don't know what a Gladysant is, though.
I think
that's what he called his big mailing list, but I don't know what a Gladysant is.
I think it's one of those
questing beast?
mythical questing beast. Yeah.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. So,
well, today, Yar me hearties. Well, kind of.
Space me hearties.
Space me hearties. Well, sort of, because this is about what happens when your players get on a boat and see another boat and say, I want to use this boat to attack that boat, GM. What do we do? And the GM goes, now this could happen to you in Spelljammer. This could happen to you in Wolfrup. This could happen to you in a historical game. Hell, this could happen to you in a sci-fi game. But there may be a point where the players want to take their ship and smash it into another ship. And what do you do? How do you handle it? Is there even a framework for this? Help! What's going on? I have a bunch of actually pretty strong opinions of this one about how you do it. But Shane, any initial thoughts?
It's sort of... it has the usual problem... Ship-to-ship combat has the usual problems of most vehicle combat RPGs, where it tends not to be 100% tied to the quote-unquote real system, and thus it always sort of feels jarring when you switch to that mode. But it also comes with the wonderful extra benefit that if the players screw up, they're probably going to drown or suffocate in space. So there's a natural trepidation on both sides when it comes up.
Absolutely. Billy, you're a Spelljammer main. What do you think?
Well, I think... Yeah, so for me, I spend much fun time wargaming out the old AD&D Spelljammer rules. And one of the things that definitely came out of that is, one, those rules they're not super simple, as it was. Two, those ships are tough as nails. You will spend a long time wailing on each other before the ship breaks up and you've got a problem. But effectively, the thing I'm looking at with this new 5e Spelljammer and kind of in general for ship combat rules is, you and I and anybody might be able to kind of intuit about what's going to happen if I, with my 3-foot bit of pointy steel, attempt something. Because, moving like a human, waving a heavy weight around, okay, you can kind of figure out what that is. Unless you've got a very specific skill set and set of hobbies, you are going to struggle to say what's going to happen if this 120-ton ship attempts to turn quickly to bring ballistas to bear on that other ship. And if that ship is trying to make sure that it gets to me so it can board with its horde of skeletons before I can break it up with ballista, how do
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we figure that one out?
You need access to the play here. Here, one of the things about it, I sat down and I thought about it for a while as a game design exercise. And where I started was I said, okay, I always like to look at how it works in real life. Mm-hmm. Not with a look towards simulating real life, but to think about how did it work? How can you apply that to a game system? One of the things about ship-to-ship combat is some people will think, oh, the smaller ships are faster. And you're like, no. The bigger ships are faster. Speed in the water is about keel length. How long is your ship determines how fast your ship can go. So the bigger your ship is, the faster it is. Now, there's a caveat to that, whereas you basically make your ship wider, it slows down. And as you put more crap on your ship, it slows down. But bigger ships are faster. So I said, okay, that's the first thing. Bigger ships are faster. That's where I start. And the second thing is that means that if you're doing kind of what people see as ship-to-ship combat, we're talking, in this case, usually kind of, it's effectively just Napoleonic Age of Sail combat, but with fireballs and swords and people jumping across. And it's movie piratical stuff. So you're like, okay, we can steal from that idea what was done back then. So bigger ships are faster. And then I went, well, what happens when you have boarding action? If it was just your 5 NPCs versus 10 mooks, well, the players are going to win. But those crews of those ships were huge. You're talking hundreds of people. Like, your players probably shouldn't beat 100 guys in a fight. And like, it means that, they're 5th level adventurers. I'm like, yeah, but the other guys probably have, 6th or 7th level commanders as well. So that shouldn't be exactly how it happens. So I said this, okay, the second assumption I have is the bigger ship wins the boarding action. Ultimately, it's going to win. It's going to grind the opposing crew down. So even if you get away, you don't have crew for your ship anymore. So, it's not like super helpful. So those were the two assumptions I started with. Okay, the bigger ships are faster, and they win boarding actions. So what does a little ship do to win? What a little ship has to do to win is it has to either maneuver more cleverly around obstacles, which is interesting, and you've got to basically I need some way to generate obstacles as a standard part of the encounter. And I got, okay, silo that off. We'll talk about navigators in a second, but I've already picked up this is a bit of crunch for the navigator to get. I take out siloing terrain. I said, how else do you do it? And I said, well, you could have a boarding action where the big ship boards your ship. And while your crew try to hold them off, your special operations division, the players, board the other ship, destroy a critical component, the main mast or the steering or whatever, cut the lines and break away. And that's how you get away. I said, okay, well, for doing that, components have to matter. So you have to effectively have hit locations that you can target their sails, or you can target their guns, or you can target their hull, or you can target their crew. And that's how you have to make those things separate. So that's where I'd start with designing a little bit of this. I'd say, okay, for this to matter, you have to have a set of kind of fixed assumptions. And then you've got to basically spiral your game design out of that. So instead of being, the two ships fire at each other and they fire attacks at each other until one runs out of hit points, that's not terribly interesting. It's a bit determinative. It's okay for a session or two, but there's very little deep gameplay there. Whereas here you've got some tactics, and okay, this ship's faster than us. Mm-hmm. So we've got to target their rigging or slow them down somewhere so we can catch up to them. Or they're faster, so we have to get away with them. We have to do the same thing. And when they board us, we got to go down, cripple the mainmast, fight the captain, escape that way. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I start putting together a bit of rules now. Do you have any kind of similar thoughts, or would you go a different direction?
So let's say I have put a very small amount of thinking into a rule system. Mainly the thing I think boarding is well covered. Whether it's like going in to kill the helmsman, whether it's going after hit locations whatsoever. It looks like the current epoch is more or less, you see the ship, maybe there's some like narrative like boats fly, take some damage, some crew get killed, bam, we're in the boarding action. Straight to boarding action. Which, okay, interesting. Or no, let's say an approach, not my favorite, because some of the stuff, so we did this myself, we did some test sessions here on different ship combat systems over last year. We tried AD&D Spelljammer, we tried the 3.5e update, Shadow of the Spider Moon, we tested Aces High from Arcadia magazine, and we tested the Calidar rules, which are like Bruce Hurd's built off OD&D, of which like Aces High is supposed to be for flying mounts. There's no board, it's all kind of like throw down dice, altitude is a dice. and it's all about maneuvers. It's basically like, okay, what you have a dice pool. What are you using your dice pool to do? Okay. That's sort of the light end of the spectrum. Then, interesting, so original Spelljammer was like the kind of, no, actually, then it was like Shadow of the Spider Moon, which was just kind of 3.5e vehicle combat with some altitude in it. You know, it was more or less what you were saying. It was weapons with hit boxes, with hit points, and the ships were just big craft that duked it out. Fine. With some maneuverability stuff around it, like how fast you could ascend, descend, very much on that kind of 3.5e. What are your calculations for how fast up and down you can go? Then you had original Spelljammer from Second Ed, which was, had a bit more crunch to it in that you, depending on how good your wizard was, that was how fast you could go. So hilariously, if you didn't have a good enough wizard, that was it. You had a low powered engine and you just got outrun. But for assuming equivalent power, there really was an interesting thing about weapon arcs and maneuverability. And we ran a test with with a heavy and 2 lights. And one of the lights had a low powered caster, so they fell behind. But the heavy and the light basically duked it out. And it was a really interesting balance between one has a lot more weapons if they can bring them to bear, whereas the other one can just nibble them to death by flying around them and keeping out of weapon arcs. So it was a really interesting tactical puzzle. And then the Kaladar system had wind direction, and your actual speed depended on whether you're going into the wind, against the wind, so on. Like you could, and you were, as you moved along, you could effectively, if you wanted to, you could recalculate how many movement points you had left as you succeeded in turning to capture, turn away from the wind, capture some more wind, off you go. So it was pretty crunchy, but it did have what you're mentioning. Every time your shot landed, you rolled to see what it hit. Weapon systems, crew, the rigging, the hull, all bits and pieces. And it had lots of interesting effects in that, hey, you knocked out one of their weapon systems. The crew was dying. Bits and pieces of their maneuverability was dropping off. So it was pretty crunchy, but we found it was interesting crunchy.
See, that's I think the bit where the little bit you need to be really careful because you're building a small war game effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so you need to basically put just enough crunch, because I think if you just do big bucket hit points, you throw dice at each other in terms of attacks, and the bigger ship is going to win, or the one with more guns is going to win. It's fairly boring. You'll do it once or twice, and that's grand. You probably won't do it again, or you'll do it very rarely. Whereas if you make it interesting enough, the players will be a lot more engaged about what's going on. And I think it becomes about, I think roles become very important then. Where who's the ship's captain? Who's the helmsman? Who's the chief gunner? Who's the engineer? Who's the commander of the Marines? Who's the medic? Mm-hmm. And then you basically go, okay, well, what do all those people do? And there's a great idea in Star Trek 2D20, which is worth stealing, which I think is, some people will have the captain do everything. I think that's a terrible fucking idea, right? Star Trek 2D20 said it has a meta currency called momentum in it, which you gain by succeeding over your default threshold for the test. Mm-hmm. And captains in Star Trek basically had a difficulty 0 action, which was basically give orders. So what the captain would do is, the captain would say, well, I'll go first. Mr. Briggs, bring the shields up, target their bridge, and full torpedo spread. Mr. Holmes, full power to shields, And then they made a command test. And the difficulty was 0, so they're going to auto-succeed at it, but they can roll if they choose. And they roll, and they get 3 successes, and cool, that's 3 momentum in the pool, which can be used to power up later people's actions. So I think the captain is going to call the game plan in some way, and the captain should be handing out a bonus or something to a player. Like if you were doing the captain, you might decide, okay, well, what you can do, captain, is you can make a command test of whatever's, like if you're doing D&D 5th ed, I hate it, but I understand the thing. You make some sort of persuasion or charisma test, and you make that test. And then you basically go, well, I target one of my players and they get inspiration for the round. And if I succeed really well, I'll target 2 players and they get inspiration for the round. So what I'm doing is I give out the orders and I hand out that bonus. Maybe that inspiration is contingent on doing what the captain told you to do. So you let them kind of call the play, and then they've given their orders, and then it's up to the other players to actually roll the dice for the attacks, or roll the dice to move, or roll the dice to spot stuff, or roll the dice to save people's lives, that kind of thing. So that's initially, I think the captain is should be this kind of shot caller that kind of gives out a bonus, and then the captain's done, and then it's up to the crew. And that means that it's not one player dominating the thing, it's one player going, here's the play, here's the bonus. And we're done. I'm done. And now the gunner is like, okay, well then the captain's told me who to shoot. If I shoot that person, I get a bonus. If I don't, grant. That's fodder for me for later or whatever. But I mean, that's how I'd start with it. And I basically portion out the roles so that there's someone in charge of the guns, someone in charge of the Marines, someone in charge of like fixing the ship when stuff gets broken. And I think that's where you get everyone's kind of okay, and you've got maybe a big character sheet for the ship. People would often go, there's a character sheet for the ship. But I was like, you know what that should be? That should be twice the size of a regular character sheet. Hell, maybe it should be 4 times the size of a regular character sheet. Maybe you should have to unfold it. Like an old, A3 map. Unfold it, there's the ship's character sheet. And that's basically gives it a bit more, weight and, majesty is like, unfold the character sheet. There we go. There's the ship's character sheet. That looks great. And that's where that's kind of what I'd start. And then I'd have different players, everyone, and I would consider having a prescribed set of actions maybe. Like, captain goes first, then the navigator moves stuff, then the gunner shoots stuff, then the marine boards stuff, then the guy tries to fix stuff, and then the medic tries to save people. And that's your preset order. And it goes around the table like that. And everyone goes, all right, I know where I'm going. And then you can have the captain have another ability, which the captain can delay their turn. Because the captain go, hold. It's, classic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what I would shoot for.
Okay, so question on that. Like, I'm fully there with you in, like, roles and, like, there should be effectively, ship actions that people can like grapple onto and do. Like, their suite of actions in ship combat is different to their suite of actions when they're swinging their own sword. Question: would you see, having your ships on a grid, things like facing, orientation, and so on, being important or not, or would you just do range bands and say, we're about this far out, this much to hit, we're closing or we're not?
I have done a lot of playing around with range bands, and it is fine and nice and abstract when you have 2 ships. The second you have 3 ships, you're like, oh god, this would be simpler just with a map.
Yeah, okay.
And that's I've done it a couple of times, and my every experience has been, this is better with a map once we have a certain level of detail. Like if you have 3 ships or 5 ships, like you might be able to juggle range bands with 3 ships. There's 2 enemy ships, there's us grand. If there's 5 ships, all of a sudden you're like, let's just use a map. Yeah. And hex maps are great. So, and like firing arcs are another very important thing you can use to delineate between the power of a big heavy ship and a lighter, more nimble ship, because you can nip out of fire arcs. Now you can adjust that, say, okay, well, if you take the maneuver action and move yourself out of the main arc, he can only shoot you with half his guns or half his normal complement. But if you do fire arcs, you players can be like, let's target the front of the ship, let's disable his chasing cannons, and then let's keep maneuvers so he's behind us directly, and we'll hit him with our basically discouraging pursuit guns, while his discouraging pursuit his pursuit guns are taken out. And that's a bit of tactical, it's a bit of, okay, what can we do? And that's creativity for the players as well. They could be like, well, can I throw a stinking cloud or something in the front of the ship so they all have to evacuate it? Yeah.
So this that would very much be in my sense of things, in that, like, while I'd be happy to run a what's it like when it is down to like just people in a room. I feel it's much easier to kind of like do theater of the mind.
Yeah,
or something like that, because people understand kind of, they can hold a thing in their mind. But when if you're saying it's like, you're in the interstellar deeps and this is what you're seeing, people don't have that intuitively. So to me, that is the point to break out the grid maps.
Yeah. And it's also terrain, right? Because you can be like, okay, there's these mists here. And like that's fodder for a player to go, can I dive into the mists? And like, yeah, here's what it does when you dive into the mists. Can I put that planet between us? So like, yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's an important bit. That's an important bit of kind of running the game.
So, question then on how much system is too much system to, and or should you introduce it to people in bite size? Should you say like, you've got your hands in a ship, here is 6 pages ship combat rules? You know, you never know when you need them. You better know.
It will be more complex than like 2 guys in a room. It's good. There's going to be more rules involved, but what it's about is finding a way to teach it to the players and keep what they need to know manageable. Because if you're running the whole ship, like if there's a captain who does everything, that player needs to know all the rules. If on the other hand, you have a navigator, you give that player a navigator card with the 3 or 4 actions they can take on it. And then they just have to look at their card, look at where the ship is and go, oh, I can move the ship. Or they go, oh, I can create hazards, or I can remove hazards, or give us a path through hazards. Oh, the gunner looks, okay, so I can do my regular shot for this, or I can put some extra power into it, this shot that's harder to hit with, but it does more damage. Or I can try raking fire, which increases my damage, like raking fire is harder. Or I can try, basically, if they can cross the T for me, I need to talk to the engineer, or the helmsman. If the helmsman can cross the T for me, I can get this shot off. Okay, cool. And what you do is, it's all about using tools to make the learning more manageable. And what you should do, I think, is basically you can just do a printout of that. If you're doing this bit of game design, there's a card, and there's the captain's card, there's what the captain can do, and you throw out all the rolls, and then the players are looking there at the okay, that's what I can do. Okay, cool. And then you put together a simplified version of that for the GM. So the GM you operate off a slightly different set of rolls, not functionally, basically instead of rolling, the GM will just get a benefit. Like remember the captain gives out an inspiration to maybe 1 to 2 people, the GM just gives out 1 inspiration to 1 guy. And that's much simpler. It doesn't have the highs or lows. There's no chance of failure. There's no chance of double success, but they just get the benefit. Like, okay, well, I'll just do that.
Yeah, that sort of reminds me of a similar system in Stars That Number. I think the Stars That Number system is an unsung hero in this case because it has an awful lot of this mentality. There's always something for any player to do. They can just take a do your duty action and just say, I'm doing something helpful. And that means the ship gets +1 point for action point this turn to do more things. But also there's ability to take a risk to get a bigger bonus. And also, I think this is interesting. The ship's captain has the ability to, like, instead of taking damage, a catastrophe happens on the ship. Like we do an emergency thing to dodge some torpedoes, but the engine starts to explode. Someone has to run to the engine and shout at people to put out the fire, and that can be something for the shouty man in the thing.
There's a game called Stars of Icarus, board game I'm playing, and one of the things in it is you can take a ridiculous amount of damage, and one of the things you can do instead of taking that damage is you can flip a system face down. Basically like, okay, my guns are offline. Or my other guns are offline. And that's a way to basically manage the fact that you were talking about what happens if my ship goes to 0, the ship sinks, and then everyone's, all the players are dead or floating in the water being by sharks. Whereas if you can damage components instead of taking big hits, You can effectively deliberately take a critical hit, which might knock out a system. You decide, okay, well, we're not going to use those guns, so let's disable my guns, and we don't have those guns for the rest of the fight, but the ship doesn't blow up. And that's very useful. It's play fodder later on, because the next thing the players want to know is how do they repair their guns. And that usually means, oh, well, you got to go into port.
Yeah.
And that's...
Well,
it's all about driving a loop of play in certain extents. Okay, well, where do you go next? Port.
True.
I just so happen to have this adventure already prepared. Like you should that'd be that's the stuff actually that I would like to see in a ship rules thing. There should be 3 or 4 adventures in the back for when your players go to port looking to get something repaired. There's always a catch, right? There's always someone. Well, I could fix it up a bit faster, but there should be. We need some more crew. Here's how you end up recruiting some chaos cultists. It's like you do a bunch. That's the really gameable stuff that's handy for a GM. It's the pre-prepared content you don't know you need until you need it.
Agree.
And then it's like, it's right there. Awesome. I'll just use this.
Yeah, I'm going to say that, but also you have put a bunch of thought into how does 3D space combat, or how does 3D space combat actually play out. And I think particularly interesting, everyone has seen let's assume vast majority of people have seen Star Wars style space dueling. Okay. Big ships sailing past each other, tons of fighters in between them. Yeah. Pew pew. Some people have seen let's assume similar amount of people have seen Pirates of the Caribbean. Let's assume some small subset of people have seen stuff like Ben-Hur with galley combat from back in the day. That's another one. But then there's that bit in between. Okay, so in Star Wars, we did have your 3D aspects. And in Pirates, you had sailing ships of kind of the heft and momentum and inertia that you would kind of be expecting to use here. But there's that, where we really would appreciate the thinking in between is how do you put those two together? What happens when you have something as fast as a sailing ship that, turns about as quickly, and is not sort of custom designed for 3D space combat with weapons blisters all over it. What happens when that's in 3D space? Does how fast you can roll your ship matter? Does how fast you can turn it matter?
Is there an up in Starjammer? Is there a gravity plane effectively?
There's each ship has one, and then as you come into contact with each other, you will synchronize. But if you are at distance, then we totally could be, masts to masts and circling each other and shooting up. I
think you kind of end up collapsing that down to either some sort of advantage or altitude mechanic.
Yeah.
And some fighter games use that where basically someone has altitude. It'd probably be best done as position rather than altitude in this one.
I've seen it called energy sometimes just because altitude is the same as speed.
Yeah. So maybe you look at it in terms of position where you have more advantageous position. And this is a great way to bring wind into a game where a person who has the more advantageous positioning, has the weather gauge or whatever, is okay, well, I've got more speed, and that's one way to do it, but maybe I also have more position because it's easier to maneuver my vessel around. I think something like that where you abstract it out a bit, because you can get into 3D modeling a 2D map. I've done it. It is not the most fun in the world. A measure of position, a positional score that you'd reduce to attack, or you reduce for some maneuvers or an increase for other maneuvers, is valuable because it means that it becomes a little meta resource you're using. So you can't go crazy with these, but maybe everyone's looking to spend it, and you collapse down to one resource, and you go, okay, who generates that resource, that positional resource? And they go, well, the captain generates some by setting your approach, and the navigator can generate some, and the pilot can generate some, and everyone else is spending it. And you basically you split your group up into builders and spenders, and people can go on different. Sometimes the captain can spend something, go, hold on, we'll hold, and that's a spend action. And you basically have a whole thing of then the players are kind of one it's very tempting to go crazy with meta resources. Generally, it's better to have one sort of pool of energy or position or something, or advantage or something like that, and go, okay, we're generating this advantage pool, and we spend out of the advantage pool to get special effects, and we build the advantage pool by doing kind of more humdrum actions, like steady as she goes or whatever that builds, or careful maneuvering maybe builds it up, where you have less speed and you don't move as much, but you position yourself carefully to get the shot on the other person. So you're all about, well, I'm going to try and cross the T, because that's way better than basically I'm trying to get myself in a position where my broadside will travel through the length of the other ship if I hit it. And that's way more damage. So I try to do that. And I think something like that is you've got to try and make it manageable. So I would break it down into, you've got a resource called position or advantage or whatever you want to call it. And that's built by some characters and it's spent by other characters. And you give them a card, and each card is going to have different options. Like maybe everyone's got a builder and a spender. Maybe the gunner is taking aim, and that's his spend. Okay, this round we're going to take aim. We're just going to reload the guns and take careful aim. That's my action for the round. Bonk. We don't fire, but we get a bonus. We increase the advantage, and everyone basically can do. And then everyone's kind of making a decision on their turn. There's a teamwork element. There's a common resource they're building up, and they're spending.
Yeah,
and that's kind of cool.
I would agree, and like. Two things on that. One, a system like that, if you've got one meta resource and clear ways to build and spend, everyone's involved, it's going to feel really different.
Yes.
But it's not going to be so complex that I came to play an RPG, not a war game. But I think that's it. Like, it needs to have enough of there's something different going on, something cool that we don't do normally, to make ship combat feel like, yeah, we want to do more than that, as opposed to like, yeah, this is junk. Let's just board them, because it's more fun fighting as ourselves than it is to actually fight the ship.
Yeah, I think you want an approachable level of crunch, but to feel different, and everyone to be kind of involved.
Yeah,
and I think that's good. I mean, the slightly more complex stuff is you have like a wizard. And like a wizard often is a personal piece of artillery. So how do you handle that? You got to put a little bit of thought into that of like, how big are your AoEs when it comes down to it?
Yeah.
And that's occasionally a little, but that just requires a little bit of extra thought, as wizards are wont to do. They often have a thing, you might need to basically go, okay, well, there's a ship's wizard roll. And here's, you can burn your spell slots for this stuff. And they're all very nice effects depending on what you're doing, but it's that's... We're not going to completely reinvent the wheel for you.
I think it's an interesting one though, so ideally, given that there's effectively so much of the rules are like, magic and its ways of doing weird and wacky stuff, definitely like the system... whatever system you're using to run the ships, and I think we've kind of described it, like, should bolt onto the core system. So you can just read the spell description and say, okay, this is how it works. My ships, like, they don't have hull points. They do have, like, hundreds of hit points. Like, they do still have hit points. So I know I fire a fireball, it blows this many hit points off the hull.
Yeah. And like, if you're taking your navigator action or your captain action, you're using the same skills that you normally would, just with a new use.
Yeah.
So you're not suddenly having a brand new captaining skill or gunnery skill, which is completely different from your archery skill. Like, that might be more realistic if you're like someone in the Navy or something. But for the purpose of the game, you want people came to play the RPG, not the war game. So having the sections of the RPG in it is probably the smarter way to go.
Like, and you could also, it means so while I've seen some old supplements, like there's a whole new bunch of feats, there's a whole new bunch of skills, there's a whole new bunch of subclasses you could be, for, let's say, marginal gain, versus you just base it off the attributes, like you're saying, and you also then solve, coming back to the wizard's point, what happens if the wizard gives you, like, Owl's Wisdom, and then the navigator makes their check. Great. Navigator gets a bonus. We see exactly how the whole thing fits together. They get 2 points of position this round, etc. And it all it neatly folds back into itself.
Yeah, I think you can make a little bit of effort, give it a little bit of thought, put together probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 pages of rules, and you'll get something that has a little bit of heft to it. Now, the stuff that's fiddly that you're going to have to work on, you're going to have to think about critical hit tables a little bit. And you're going to have to think about critical hitting locations and what happens when you hit when you hit the main mast, you hit the guns, how many guns, what's the damage on them, and you kind of got to scale that a little bit and have a think about it. Like, does one salvo from a dreadnought blow your average PC-sized ship into splinters? Like how do you scale the damage carefully? How do you scale the hit points carefully? Because these are often the ships are huge. They're if you had some of the ships, like the nautiloids, right? They're giant, right? Like the kind of big spelljammer squid ships, the mind flayer ones. They're big, right? They're like hundreds of feet long, yeah?
Some of them aren't too big, but then there are some even bigger ones with arrays of ballista. And,
you have to think a little bit about that in terms of scaling about, okay, so is there a penalty for bigger ships attacking smaller ships? And there probably should be. And maybe the penalty is not, instead to accuracy, maybe the penalty is to damage. And you have to have a think about that. It's too hard to hit a small ship with your full broadside. You're just going to clip them with some of your broadside. And that's the thing you got to maybe playtest a bit about and realize, hang on, your average player ship gets splatted by 1 round of fire from this thing. Well, we shouldn't have that. We should basically come up with a way to scale the damage so it's not we don't absolutely bully smaller ships out of the thing, which sadly kind of happened in real life, which is why the ships get bigger and bigger. Like, if you look at the old Age of Sail ships towards the end, you're talking everyone's like, oh, well, there's 3 cannon on this ship. I'm like, lads, there was 50 or 60 cannon aside on these ships. And for that to work, you had to have hundreds of gunners. You had to have, a force of kind of at least 200 or 300 Marines to have any chance of taking another ship. You had to have all these weren't like, oh, it's a squad of guys I'm leading. No, you're leading a small army on a relatively small piece of real estate.
Yeah,
and that's where it starts.
Did you ever read any of the what's his name, Cochrane the Seawolf? Like a guy, he was sort of like Napoleonic era, had a frigate, I think, or a corvette. It was a frigate. And he was basically tactical mastermind, just terrorized the coast of Spain, raiding things, attacking infantry columns, but would regularly detach a bunch of dudes to go after objectives on shore. And this was, this was feasible. He had companies worth of guys on board that it'd be take some guys, go up there, take that battery. Meanwhile, the rest of you will be sort of fighting the ship as we engage the town. And that was like a small ship.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's good stuff if you can manage to. What you need to do is I need to have enough complexity to feel like my players' decisions matter. And that they have different things to do, but you don't want so much that slows down and grinds down to a war game level. So you want to scale the damage. So, okay, 1 hit doesn't splat a ship, but maybe 6 or 7 are probably going to cripple it. And then you can start to look into morale as well as a factor. And how long is your boarding action? You're going to have to, you don't do 3-second turns or 6-second turns or whatever. Your turns are probably going to be a minute or at least. And maybe a bit longer to represent the fact that, well, lots happening, guys. It's not basically one thing is happening. There's a lot of stuff is happening because you could be commanding hundreds of, there could be 100 gunners under your command firing 25 ballista. How do you contract that down a bit? You don't fire 25 ballista. You have to come up with rules for battery fire that are appropriate for what you're doing. Don't be like, oh, well, I'll just rattle up all the dice together and then roll them. And there's nothing more tedious than thousands of hit points having to be subtracted. I would nearly be using average dice unless the players really want to roll them. Just no, it just does, let's see, 15 ballista, that does whatever, 100 points damage, And if they're a smaller ship, by you basically break it down by you have some way to portion it down. Well, that's a smaller ship. You only get half damage on them.
Yeah.
And then if you spend the resource for more points, you go, okay. Well, I'm actually gonna increase that damage to 150 this turn.
Yeah. It's an interesting one though. Of like, while I guess there's a point of like you want to make sure that a ship, like, basically doesn't come apart under a breath of wind.
No, because they wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're going to be some hardy, and like so the systems I've seen, they tended to be tougher than the guns. Like there's 20 rounds of or 20 odd successful hits from the average armament they were carrying. It takes to take them down. So you got some time. But I'm not. On the other hand, though, like, an element of, the big ships need to be approached with extreme caution.
Yeah.
You've got, like, your little raiding vessels from Spelljammer, like the Wasps, the Dragonflies, all that kind of stuff. But, like, when you're up with a Death Spider, a Nautiloid, something like that, it would be entirely reasonable. Like, if you see one of these, it's like, nope. And, turn around and off you go, unless you are getting the drop on them and you're approaching them, like, unless you got a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're like, look at a Napoleonic fiction, what happens when a 10-gun ship takes on a 60-gun ship? Well, the 10-gun ship, unless it has a very good plan, is in serious trouble. You need to be within probably within a equivalent of a standard deviation of size or whatever. Like, yeah, you can go 1 up. Or 2 up, maybe, in terms of size classes. But like after that, you need serious outnumbering. And they're probably going to delete one of you around. And that's okay as well, because the players can go, well, okay, let's put together a plan about us. And maybe one of the plans is you put some of that positional spread is when a little ship gets murked, it's not your ship. Actually, we're just going to spend some points here. That wasn't our ship. You hit our sister ship there. The old, SS Redshirt. It took the hit on that one, and that's the kind of thing you should think about if you're going to put in. Well, then it can be okay. We've got 10 raiders. Let's go take on the big ship. Some of us will die, but we'll chew them up, and then we'll board them. And I mean, I think making them the ships tough enough that often the best option is nibbling away at the defenses, knocking off some of the special features, knocking down the mast, putting a penalty on speed, put a penalty on speed, put a penalty on speed until you can get away. Is kind of a good way to go about it. You've got some options. You can, because unlike in a lot of player kind of fantasy, I think players are more willing to be the guys who escape from a big ship rather than the people who insist on being able to take on and kill the big ship. I think Star Wars and other ones have taught the lesson that being clever and escaping the pursuing ship is also cool. And you kind of have to play into that of how did the players get away, and you give them well, maybe we need some chain shot or a trap or something like that to foul their anchor, or break up their hit their steering, or basically damage their rigging and kind of get away like that. And then we get away and yeah, woohoo! We sail away. And I think players will be more up for that than they are for running away from other fights. I think they visibly, and then ultimately we get our alliance of little ships together and we go back and beat them up. And it's like, yeah, I think that's the kind of play arc players might appreciate, But that's, this is, a retreat is acceptable under these circumstances, or escape is acceptable, certainly.
Yeah.
In a way that it often isn't in standard play when it's like a street fight in the middle of a dungeon.
Yeah. So actually, a question then. Owen, I know you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have played in that legendary, 5-10 year long Star Wars campaign.
Yeah.
Were there notable sort of ship to ship actions in there that you would say like that's the effect we're trying to get?
There were some decent ones. The ship to ship combat in that we were mostly done under variants of D20. So most of the time, ships were kind of big bags of hit points, and you were trying to chew through them. They had gotten out at that stage some kind of classes with talent options where you improve the performance of your ship, where you could target something specific on another ship and cut them down. So they were really kind of closer to, because we were in either one-man fighters or big ships. It was really closer to kind of a slugfest between lots of ships, and the lots of ships made it more entertaining than it would have been one ship on one ship. Generally speaking, we got some mileage out of 3 or 4 fighters versus effectively a freighter. And we got some, and then in that situation, you had a system where like the pilot flew the ship and also maybe fired the main guns, and then you had 2 gunners, and then you had other people doing other stuff that could help a little bit. They improved it a bit because I played in a different FFG one where they had some good enough system for, like, if you were the ship's like engineer, you could put more power to shields, you could do other, like you could do some stuff there, and that was the kind of role-based stuff. Where it kind of fell down was it was too easy for your ship to explode. Like, damage used to come in, and like 2 hits would usually take most ships down to almost nothing or to nothing. Like, we got in and it was like, TIE hits us once. I'm like, okay, that wasn't great. TIE hits us a second time. I'm like, yeah, we're at a hole. We're just floating in space. It could have ruined, like, that's not great. And we went and we found a set of alternate rules that went into kind of positioning an advantage, and what you're doing is trying to basically be, if you had advantage of another ship, you were harder to hit, and it was easier to hit them. And so you kind of trying to rebalance the stuff that way, and they changed how shields work. So shields became this resource that you spent. Ship strain was originally your ship energy, and you basically like take strain on your ship to block damage on the shield. So it was harder to basically vape your ship in 2 shots. So that was, so it did, like, I think something like that. I've played around with a bunch of different ways of doing it, and I'm pretty firmly convinced that you want roles, you want people doing different things. You don't want the ships either too hardy or too squishy. And I think certainly for ship-to-ship combat in kind of the Spelljammer, the Age of Sail kind of thing, you want to be able to target parts of the other ship to expand the tactical range and make it like, you go, okay, well, everyone's got a speed. And that's one of the other things. You might need to basically have a look at a map, and you could try and do something very clever where speed matters in terms of relative position. Mm-hmm. And you could do the rolling map, where you're not actually moving around a battle map. You're actually in quite a confined space, which could be good for a smaller table, or like I don't have to make a giant map with 1 million squares on it. I have a nice small map with 1 million squares, because this is your engagement range, and when one of you is chasing and the other 2 are coming together, you're just going to come together. And if 2 of you are pursuing, well, I move the terrain instead. And then I calculate the difference in speed, and that's how much the faster ship gets closer, or the other ship gets closer away. If you get off the map, you escape. And you can do some stuff like that. You can be clever. Yeah. As a designer and as a thing, you can put together something that, like, oh, this will work. This will be useful for us, you know? And I think there's value in it. I think you don't want it too different. Like, don't change the core resolution mechanic necessarily, but you might monkey around with turn order. That's one thing I thought about. As that you might be... All the captains go, then all the moving happens, then all the firing happens, then the boarding actions happen.
Yeah, interesting.
And you use some stuff like that where you basically I've done it both ways, and I think you try out both and you come to you sort out the one you like more and you go with that. Yeah. But there's an argument for both, basically.
There's definitely, like, every system I've seen that's like Spelljammer or Spelljammer adjacent has definitely run with, here are places where others may act along this sequence. Yeah. Recent example was, like, you know, the declaration of what the ship's move is going to be, then all of the attacks, and then whatever the move was, and then you end up wherever it was. But and then, like, if there's a wizard running around with his wand of fireballs, whatever, like, they could act at any point along that sequence. But, like, this is the sort of rhythm of the ship operating. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, okay. So I think, like, the kind of, the thing that I'm, maybe to kind of take it back up to the top, was, like, it's looking at how, like, we have not gotten much in the beyond, get to boarding from the kind of that new thing, or rather the new Spelljammer, and it really, to make things feel different from we're having a fight in a tower to we're having a fight down a nautiloid. We sort of need this close to contact phase. Doesn't have to be super heavy.
No.
But it sort of needs to be there.
I think so. And I mean, I think you can as well, you can have an option where you do a detailed boarding action, and you have an option where you do an abstracted boarding action where it's shorter. And one of the things I had was, well, when you're doing a boarding action, the Marine had two options, where one of them was you can do you can kind of do the standard boarding action where you just go and you fight and use your crew skill. And then I came up with an idea of a bit like being a champion in Wolfrup. You can go, no, you can use your combat skill instead. But then you take damage based on the size of the other crew. So this thing where you can hero hammer if you want, but you're going to take so much damage depending on the other side of the crew that you'll be like, yeah, I can do that maybe once or twice during this fight. I could be like the guy going, rather, instead of making these +5 accuracy attacks that do whatever crew damage, the ship thing, I can go, well, I'll do my accuracy attacks as well, which add extra damage, and I'll do this, and I fight from the front, and I do something really heroic, maybe I do a critical hit, something. What happens? And then I take 78 damage. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not doing that again, Murray. And that's basically, you can do things like that where someone, even in the mini game, is like, okay, well, I do have a choice. This is a good role for a fighter. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to leave to the front, I'm going to charge the front of the thing, I'm going to swing around, I'm going to swing my sword around, knock people over, be like Sauron and thing, but then I'm going to get very, very hurt. And because I'm going to get stabbed a lot and shot a lot, because, do I kill them? Oh, I kill like 20 of them. What was the problem? There was 100 of them left. And that's good, because it means the player has an option. It's like relatively simple. I have a choice now. And that's almost all you need to feel like there's some depth. It's like, I've got a choice about what I do.
One or two choices is all most players will really need.
Yeah.
Something to compare.
Yeah, exactly.
Some odds to calculate. The only other thing, I guess that sort of comes to my only remaining point, is that sort of make sure that the expectations for players fits the scale of the combat system. It's just like, if we're talking about your big Napoleonic style thing where there are hundreds of people per ship, then that's very different expectation, because some people will always default to sort of a Millennium Falcon style thought process where it's just us. It's just us five. It's you five and your 372 peasants you saved from that Mind Flayer planet. And it's just like, it's just us and some extra bits of the ship. Like, you have to make sure that you have the thing, because, like, for Spelljammer, ships tend to have crews because there's a lot of complicated things going on the ship, but you'll get a certain sex of players who are like, I put the magic chair on a rock and I can fly the rock around. Mm-hmm. And the idea that they are in a functioning system where they have to care about the lives of their crew might not quite occur to them. So...
Go on. I had an idea for, like, ships should have hit points, but you should also have crew.
Yeah.
And when stuff damages your crew die. And then my idea was, you then have the ship's medic, who at the end of the round can make a check and kind of record the results of how well he succeeds multiple times. And then at the end of the combat, that's how many crew you save. Because people will will often grow attached to their crew, and maybe when there's a critical hit, a named crew member can get it instead. And okay, well, I can spend some more points and save a named crew member. And you do stuff like that where it's like, okay, we lost 56 crew in that one. The medic player I made 4 or 5 checks there to save people, so we only lost 20 crew. And that's something you can do, kind of to represent them, kind of prepping and triaging people and stopping the worst of the injuries initially, before you pull off the hacksaws and start taking off limbs.
Yeah.
Something like that is good as an option,
I think, yes, I think you need a little bit of run up to that, though, in that, like, you need, during downtime or out of combat, you need to have them interacting with the crew.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they
gotta give a
need to be present as opposed to like they're walking around like an empty ship. It's like it needs a little bit of extra legwork, and they may not interact with them. I did run a campaign where the players, one of them was a ship captain, he had a ship. I got the memorable quote at the end of it. It's like, yeah, we really felt those NPCs had depth. We never bothered talking to them, but we felt that it was there if we had. It's like, yay.
You don't have to like give a name for every single junior petty officer and every cabin boy. Like as with most large collections of NPCs, having 2 or 3 focal point NPCs who are sort of talismans representing the rest of the crew will be more than sufficient. And you can have, if the crew morale drops below level, well, Jimmy, the eyeball eater, will come to complain to whatever character is treated them the best. And if you take a critical hit, well, it's old Nursey the cook who takes a cannonball to the leg. Sorry, should have used those rerolls on your dodge check.
Yep.
Like it's simple stuff, but it's effective.
Yeah. I mean, like I think I've seen someone else saying like, all of your rules for stronghold or base management apply to a ship. Like make people feel that like this is these guys' home. They live here. They very much, unless you are, unless they have a strong prospect of being able to get back to where they're from without the ship, they are going to care very much about what happens to the ship. And, if you're like, hey, okay, we are now going to go on this mission of certain death, you are going to have to persuade your crew to go along with you.
I think a morale stat is very important for this.
Yeah.
To both short-term and long-term. Because players don't surrender, crew does, though.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that what you can do is then it gives you a way to represent the tedium of travel. Whereas, the crew are gagging for a break, the morale's low, you should probably pull into port and let them get some food.
Yeah.
And
better than trying to track rations or something.
Exactly. It's like morale's going down, food is low, go to port, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a good abstracted way to kind of handle. There's a value, it decreases, and basically during combat as well, it's probably going down. This is the point at which the crew are like, let's give up.
Yeah.
This is too hard. And you're like, but we can still fight. You guys can still fight. The rest of us are out.
Yep. Do we want is there anything else we want to cover on this one, or shall we rotate to a slightly different angle on systems?
I think we've covered quite a lot on this one already. What else can we talk about? I mean, the thing is, does anything cover kind of like this? Any product out there we can go and grab and say, okay, this is what you use?
To me, so like if you want to do flying stuff in your 5e game, kind of like, let's just aim for like the what's the center mass? Then if you are doing flying mounts, then the Aces High system from Arcadia, it's light, it's fast, you've got an altitude score, you roll a bunch of dice to come up with some moves, and then you got moves you can make. That's it.
From MCDM Productions, I think Aces High is in... I want to say issue 5?
Yes. One of the early, within the first half dozen issues.
Or you could subscribe to a Patreon
and
also get it back issue.
Get them all that way. But then if you wanted to sort of go that crunchier way, it definitely the Kaladar rules are good stuff. You need to kind of assemble them. Like Bruce Hurd has put them all up on his blog. But once you can just like look for his skyship combat rules, and then if you patch them together from that, they are comprehensive, between ship plans, stats, rules, the works. It has wind, it's got ships, the crew number matters, how the condition of your hull matters, you got all your subsystems. It's like, do you want to do this kind of chunky one? Currently don't have this sweet spot one of, like, do you have a position dice? Do you have something where people have formal roles? Like, there's some that are, once you get away from, like there isn't one in that middle zone of like, everyone's got a thought through role. Here's what they could do. We've got like a meta currency, like position, or even just like that they can grant advantage or disadvantage or something like that. That is, I am not aware of something that's like that at the moment. If
I would just like to pimp Stars Out Number again, because even if all those subsystems in it aren't necessarily what you're looking for, the free PDF comes with an awful lot of subsystems, so it's never a terrible idea to have get a copy of Stars Outnumber, just even if it's only to mine for ideas.
I have it from a humble bundle somewhere in my giant pit of PDFs. I will haul it out.
Well, yeah, I think we've gone over.
I think let's ask our readers though, if they've got a great idea for a flying ship combat system, come to the Discord. Please tell us.
Or if you have wonderful stories about the time your Shadowrunners, bazooka jumped their SUV off a Maltol highway, with similar results to crashing your skyship into a top of a beholder moon.
All right, if you have any ideas as well about how these should be written up, or who has the ultimate set of starship rules out there, or sailing ship rules out there, hit us up on our Discord, contact us in our social medias. But for now, this party's over.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter. Or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.